Hey everybody, welcome to this very special Well Connected interview. My name is Joe Rignola, founder of Well Connected, and joining me today is my friend Jane Hogan. Hey Jane, thanks so much for being here.
Hello, Joe. I'm so happy to be here and talk with you today.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I know you've got so much great information, and you've got a really amazing event coming up that we're in the middle of right now, called Becoming Pain Free. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But I know you're always have so much great information when it comes to pain and healing and mindfulness and things like that. So those are some of the things that I want to jump into today. Um, I know my audience is particularly interested in gut health and microbiome and also brain health. So maybe let's start there. I know you like to talk about emotions and gut health and the microbiome. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how emotions can impact our microbiome and our gut health, and maybe even the other way around, like how our gut can impact our
Mm.
brain and mental health and things like that. So I would wonder if you could just kind of give us a 30,000 foot view of like that connection, that gut brain connection.
I kind of there's so many we can have like 99 symptoms, right? Of poor health. And it could be pain, it could be, gut problems, it could be skin rashes, it could be brain fog, all of these different kinds of things. But I kind of I just try to distill things down to like how can I make this as simple as possible, and what is the simplest thing? And I spent so long researching, and I've interviewed, as you know, like hundreds of
Hmm.
people now, read thousands of books and research papers and so on,
Hmm.
and also work with people. So when I kind of do that 30,000 foot view and say what is the underlying thing that we can work on, it
Hmm.
comes back to, from my point of view, for what I read, it comes back to the nervous system,
Hmm.
right? Which is, our brain as well, comes back to our thoughts, right?
Hmm.
Which affects our nervous system. And then the nervous system, through the subconscious mind, is running the body. And so then we get all those downstream effects of, okay, we could start getting, because it's the immune system, digestive system, and the hormonal systems that get most affected right away, impacted by nervous system dysregulation. So when we're kind of stuck, or most often in that stress response, fight or flight, sympathetic, whatever you want to call it, when we're in that state most of the time, and sometimes people might not even realize it, that they're,
Sure.
you start to get those downstream things happening, right? You start to get problems with gut health. And then, because we're not making all the hormones, and then we may not feel good, and the neurotransmitters, and then we get stiffness. We can get stiffness in the body, because actually all of this is for protection. So when we're
Hmm.
in that sympathetic state, where, our brain thinks, and our nervous system thinks, protection time. It literally thinks we are in mortal danger, and so it's putting up protection mechanisms for that.
Right. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So how does that, it sounds like this sort of paradoxical thing where it's protecting us, but it may be causing these symptoms like joint pain or arthritis.
Yeah.
Um, how do we start to unwind that? Like, what are some protocols that you've used to sort of help people regulate their nervous system, where they can have a reduction in those symptoms, particularly when it comes to pain and things like that, and inflammation?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, where do we even start? I mean, some
Mhm.
really simple things right away are breath work. And I know you talk about that as
Yeah.
well. And, we always have it with us.
Hmm.
It's portable, it's cheap, as cheap as it
Yeah.
gets. And it's, the breath is abundant all around
Right.
us. And so practicing some breath work is a great way. But to kind of calm in the moment, if you're
Mhm.
noticing I'm feeling agitated, or anxious or worried. But then there's also, really, it comes back to habits, and how, what's our habitual way of thinking, because what you do once in a while does not matter nearly as much as what you do most of the
Mhm.
time. And so it comes back to, like, what's your habitual way of thinking? So do you, are you the kind of person that, the glass is half empty? Do you and then, if you have these symptoms, because pretty much everyone in our community has these symptoms,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts at, like, with that? So when I had rheumatoid arthritis and I was in all this pain, and I get constant thoughts of, what's this going to mean for my future? I can't stay in this
Mhm.
house. I'm not going to be able to manage the stairs. How am I going to,
Mhm.
all of these fear thoughts, and our brain is wired to pay attention to things that create fear in us. And then we kind of keep making grooves, right? Kind of like a pathway in a field.
Right.
We keep wiring the same neural networks in our brain around that. And then so we create, well, for in my audience, it's mostly people with pain. So it's a pain
Mhm.
fear cycle. But
Mhm.
whatever your symptom is, it's that symptom, fear about the symptom, more of that symptom, more fear, and you just keep going around and around.
Yeah.
So there's really, you have to kind of start with awareness of, oh, that I can do something. I notice what's going on and I can do something about it. And the beautiful thing about this is that the only one that can do something about your thoughts is you. So
Mhm.
um so it's very empowering. I think it's very empowering. Now people, sometimes what I get is people thinking, well, I created this problem in me. And I don't think anyone intentionally created problems. Like I didn't
Sure.
intentionally create RA in
Mhm.
my body, but I did have like underlying stress that went like way back to trauma, mild trauma, but trauma in childhood. And so I was carrying this underlying stress all the time, and I didn't really know it, and I didn't really know the tools to do anything about it. But what I like to say to people is that the fact that you have created these symptoms in your body is evidence of how powerful you are.
Mhm.
So I
Absolutely.
like to turn it around that way.
Yeah, if you created it, you can fix it, you can heal it. With the
Exactly.
same power that created it can heal it.
Yeah.
Amazing. So you mentioned a couple of things here that I want to dig a little deeper on. One was breath work and one was trauma. Particularly what you mentioned is sort of this more mild or Alex Howard calls it covert trauma as opposed to overt trauma. And I like that. But let's talk about breath work, because when you say breath work, people might be thinking, is it just meditation, or is it like this sort of breath work can be like this intense practice where you
Yeah.
are sort of stimulating DMT in your brain and having this incredibly deep and powerful spiritual experience. So when you say breath work, what exactly, what's the practice there? What
Mhm.
exactly does that mean?
Well, it could kind of mean any of those things. And it
Mhm.
depends really where the person is. If they've never thought about controlling their breath before, well,
Mhm.
then that they're in a different place than the people that have, been going to yoga practice and
Right.
maybe heard about Ujjayi breath or, some of
Mhm.
these other breaths, right? So it
Mhm.
depends on where the person is. But at the very basics of it is that we're breathing low into the belly.
Mhm.
We're breathing longer breaths,
Mhm.
and we're not breathing too much, because we can actually breathe too much, right,
Mhm.
where we don't have enough carbon dioxide to,
Right.
because we need the carbon dioxide to shuttle the oxygen into our cells.
Mhm.
So you can actually have too much oxygen and not enough carbon dioxide.
Mhm.
It's in a weird paradox,
Right.
but not that we want to get too complicated. you
Mhm.
will you will get there if you breathe slowly, breathe deeply, so into the lower part of the lungs, which people usually call belly breathing, because that's what it feels like, because the belly is the diaphragm moves down and pushes the belly out and moves the belly out and in.
Mhm.
And then longer exhales than inhales. And there's been science around that, because I do a lot of studies on looking at
Mhm.
studies on chronic pain. That especially helps reduce chronic pain when exhales are longer than inhales. So
Okay.
just kind of basic like that is a great simple way to start.
Why is that? Why is the exhale so important and so much more powerful?
I think part of it may be because the heart rate variability
Mhm.
can increase. So, heart rate variability is the variation in successive heartbeats, which is tied to our breath, of course.
Mhm.
And so, when we can stretch them out, um, and on the inhale, our heart rate speeds up a teeny bit, and on the
Okay.
exhale, it slows down a little bit.
Makes
So
sense.
on if we're exhaling slowly, then we're slowing down, and we're getting that variation then, and a high heart rate variability. It's
Mhm.
well, it's an indicator. Heart rate variability is an indicator of stress in the body. So
Mhm.
when heart rate variability is higher, then it's an indicator that we've got less stress in the body. And then that is associated with all, the good markers of health,
Sure.
say.
Uh,
So yeah, that there's a little bit of a difference between the inhale and the exhale in terms of our heart rate.
hmm,
So yeah, it makes a difference. And oh, the other thing I forgot to say with breath work too, if at
uh,
all possible, you want to breathe through in and out through the
mm,
nose most of the time. So
mhm,
that pressurizes the breath, it filters. That's the first part of our immune system, right?
mhm.
And also it builds up nitric oxide, which
Okay.
opens up airways. It's a dilator, so then you get the oxygen going where it needs to go. So it improves efficiency. It improves efficiency when we breathe through our nose. So
So breathing through
that's
your
the
nose,
yeah,
yeah, so it actually increases nitric oxide.
yeah.
What are
And
your
if
thoughts on?
someone, oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask, what are your thoughts on mouth taping? Like, it seems to be a
Uh,
newer trend, right? With people
yeah,
who are
we
sleeping
got some tape
their
right
mouth.
here. Uh,
There you go.
I don't tape my mouth myself, but I am not a mouth breather. But if someone is a mouth breather, it's a great way to kind of remind your mind.
Hmm.
Now you don't need to like kind of go duct
Yeah.
tape. It's just a little bit, right? Like a
Yeah.
size of a postage stamp, so
Okay.
that it reminds your brain, okay, breathe through the nose.
Right.
And yeah, there's all kinds of science on how nasal breathing is so much healthier than
Mhm.
mouth breathing. It actually changes your facial structure and
Mhm.
everything. It's kind of wild.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say earlier is sometimes people say, I can't breathe through my nose. They've been a chronic mouth breather and
Right.
they just can't breathe through their nose. They're like, can't get air in. So or maybe they've got like a cold or something like this. And I
Mhm.
find this nose unblocking exercise really good.
Oh, okay.
So you basically have a normal breath in through the nose and then a normal breath out through the nose. And then you plug your nose, keeping your
Mhm.
mouth closed, and you move your head all up and down and around and just move around until you have a moderate need to inhale again. And then you
Okay.
just take a normal breath in through the nose again. So,
Interesting.
yeah, and it opens up the air. Sometimes I'll do that at night if I wake up and I'm a bit congested.
Okay.
So it's a super exercise. If you just
I love
remember to
that.
do it, it's fabulous.
Yeah, it's so simple and it's free.
Yeah.
It's
I
great.
love all the free tools. I do.
Yeah. Amazing. So cool. And you mentioned trauma before, and I thought it was really interesting because you specifically said, something like a smaller trauma
Yeah.
or mild trauma. Any opportunity I have to talk about this, I love talking about it because I don't think it's talked about enough. When everyone thinks of trauma, they think of, loss or abuse or something massive. And of course, those can be devastating.
Yeah.
What I don't think people talk about is this more overt. Like I said, I used to say big T, a little T trauma.
Yeah.
And Alex Howard, when I interviewed him for Rewire Your Brain, said, I don't like that because it's sort of it sort of elicits this comparison. Like my trauma is
Right.
not as big as yours. And it's like all this trauma really affects our brains very similarly, whether it's tripping on the sidewalk or something more significant. And so I've started to use overt and covert trauma. How has trauma like affected you? Because you mentioned that it had affected
Mhm.
your symptoms, but how in general, how does whether it's over or covert trauma, how does that affect us into adulthood, even if it's something that happened when we were 5 or 10 or 12?
Yeah. You know, we've known for a while with the ACEs study, right?
Mhm.
Adverse childhood events that, when some people had high trauma, they are much more likely to get health problems later in life, including autoimmune conditions.
Right.
Um, and they're as the research uh, it grows, they're realizing that even as you said, more the overt, covert, both kinds of trauma can affect people later in life because it's not really the event. And I've
Mm.
learned this from interviewing Dr. Amy Piggin, who's on my
Right.
summit. She talks about it's not the event, it's your response to it. It's the
Hmm.
body's response to it. And so it can be mitigated by, if you felt supported, then perhaps this even if it might have been a severe kind of trauma may not have impacted you as much as something mild if you didn't feel supported. So for me, I mean, and I love my brother. I have an older brother. I do love him dearly, but he was 5 or 4.5 when I was born, and when I came along, he just started teasing me. And so my whole early life, all I remember was being teased
Right.
and being called a crybaby, because of course he would tease me until I cried. And then I stuttered, and then he teased me for stuttering.
Oh, wow.
And so I kind of took, I mean, obviously I grew up to be, a fine, confident woman, and I went on, did engineering. I was smart, all those things. But
Mhm.
deep down, I still had this kind of belief that I didn't have anything worth saying,
Wow.
that wasn't good enough.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I would never have admitted that out loud. And, so I'm totally like open and vulnerable now.
Yeah.
And, but that's kind of where I was my whole life. So it's like a simmering, like a little simmering
Mhm.
stress that's always there because, at some core level, you don't feel good enough.
Right.
And then what I found with Dr. Gabor, and I love my brother now, by the way. I had to do a lot of work. Once I realized
Yeah.
this,
Yeah. Yeah.
I really started doing a lot of work around it and realized,
Mhm.
well, of course, I set up some protections because of how I felt back then. And some of my protection was people pleasing,
Mm.
perfectionism,
Right.
hypervigilance, hyper independence, being overly polite, never wanting to say, no, I don't want to do that. I'll just,
Mhm.
whatever anyone wants, I'll go along. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always wanting to do things for people, and then always feeling guilty that it was never enough. That was
Mhm.
me my whole life. And when I speak to people now with chronic pain, other conditions, they'll go, I say, how many of these do behavioral adaptations did you create for
Mm.
protection? And they'll say all of
Yeah.
them, or,
Yeah.
most of them, or something like that.
Yeah.
So that was back, the term is like fight or flight. And then the one that's kind of used now as well is fawn. It's the
Mhm.
fawn behaviors, right? Like I have to behave in a way that
Right.
people are going to love me. But
Mhm.
when the underlying belief is I'm not enough, you can never do enough,
Never mind. Wow. Yeah.
right?
Well, I could
So
certainly relate to that. I'm the youngest of six siblings, and I remember growing up with that same sort of feeling. Like my older brother teased me quite a bit, and realizing that there was almost like this natural rivalry there, and it was almost a protection mechanism for him.
exactly,
And
hurt
it's
people.
all like it's all and so it's just grateful to have the awareness of it now and that's where it starts, right? You have to have the awareness and then you can start to heal from it. But it's the same thing, like so avoiding conflict to
Mm,
a fault, right? Like just didn't want to have any sort of conflict with anyone because I didn't ever want to feel like that again. So
yeah.
I can really resonate with that. Um we talked about so the trauma piece is really so important. I think my it's my supposition that everyone has some form of trauma.
I think you're right. Everyone does. You can't escape trauma.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And it is, and the more we try to suppress it, the more it's going to affect us.
Yeah.
So
I love
it's
that people are talking about it now.
yeah,
It's coming
so
out in
much.
the open,
Yeah.
and people are realizing, okay, because this is what I was thinking, like I'm, when all this started, I was 50 years old. Now I'm
Mm.
58, but I'm 50 years old now. I should be over that by now.
Yeah.
But
Same.
but
Yeah.
we get those little programs before the age of 7, and they're like in there, right? We
Hmm.
we have to reprogram. So like
Right.
sometimes I call it like brain retraining. Like we have to
Sure.
retrain our brain with new messages, and
Hmm.
it takes effort to do that. It's not going to
Right.
happen without conscious effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you talked about Dr. Amy and Dr. Gabramante. I heard that from Dr. Gabramante, where talked about it's not the trauma, it's how your body responds to it
Yeah.
and how much resilience you have to that. And you know, and you mentioned that, prior to 7 years of age. And like, so that starts to set up how resilient you're going to be or not to certain inputs and traumas. And I think it's just fascinating to me because, some people have a very traumatic birth, and then that's going to lower their resilience to everything that happens after that. It
Hmm.
takes a
Yeah.
lot to sort of unwind and unpack that. So what
or
have
or
been some of
maybe their
the,
mother was stressed
yeah,
while she was pregnant, and
100%.
those
Yeah.
chemicals of stress, because we
Hmm.
create chemicals of stress in our body,
Hmm.
that crosses the placenta, right? And so
Yeah.
then you're wondering why. I don't know. Nothing happened. Who knows? Who knows?
Right.
Maybe she never ever talked about it.
Yeah, no, it's like, yeah, we like again, I can think about my childhood and it's like I had a wonderful childhood, I had two loving parents and a great family, and it was all incredible. And yet there was still these little insults that happened over and over again that, looking back through the adult lens, it's like, oh, that was nothing. Like you said, I should be over this by now. That wasn't that big of a deal. But it just the more you say that I shouldn't be reacting to this or I should be over this, the more it's going to affect us. The more it's going to, we still have this 5-year-old inside of us that are making decisions of us when we're in our 50s.
Exactly,
So it's,
exactly.
oh yeah.
I love the not that I'm an expert in it or anything like that, but
Mhm.
I know a little bit about internal family systems. And I love
Mhm.
that, we've got these different parts of us that are trying to protect us
Yeah.
or still want to have their say. So
Mhm.
that's like for me, this little girl, this, 3,
Mhm.
4, 5-year-old girl, still like crying in the corner
Yeah.
and just never really getting over her sadness. She's over it now though. But
Yeah.
sometimes she still shows up and I have to do work.
Exactly. Yeah. No, thank you. It's like, it's again this meeting that little person with gratitude and saying thank you for, trying to protect me all these years, but I'm in charge now.
Mhm.
How important has in your healing journey and with your clients, how important is community and connection to someone's healing journey?
Well, I mean, I love coming back to the science. There's so much science behind the importance of community. We know a study came out a little while ago. The number one indicator of longevity was not the quality of the food you eat, not how much you exercise, none of that stuff. It was the quality of your relationships.
Mhm.
So important. And for people who are in pain or people with a chronic condition can feel really isolated. And because I mean, even my husband, wonderful husband and loves me, but he didn't really understand what I was going through. And so you need to have some support around you like
Mhm.
that, people that understand you, but people that care. Every when you feel cared for, coming back to the nervous system again, it can go, ah,
Mhm.
okay, I'm
Mhm.
okay. Someone's got my back, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so it's really important. And
Mhm.
I think like when I look at everything through the lens of the nervous system, it makes total sense why it's so important. We
Sure.
we are wired to like way back when, our ancestors. If you weren't part of the tribe, that was life or it meant probably certain death for you, right? So we do have that built-in mechanism that says we need to be in a group and we need to have people around us that support
Mhm.
us.
Do you think, and I totally agree, and so we are hardwired for that connection and community. It is life or death in some cases. But do you think, you know, has social media or connect, like we wouldn't be able to have this interview if it wasn't for the internet and for this, for Zoom and things like that. Do you think that it's creating communities online is um has been beneficial to finding community where you wouldn't be able to find it otherwise?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think
Mhm.
it can go both ways. It just
Yeah.
depends. It depends
Mhm.
on the community. So when I first was diagnosed with RA, I started joining Facebook groups
Right.
and with about RA, and I found everybody was just for the most part complaining and commiserating,
Right.
and so that wasn't helpful. In fact, and they were
Mhm.
always posting pictures of how look how swollen I am today. This sounds like I'm not very compassionate. I was compassionate, but
Yeah.
I knew that I didn't want to be bathed in all of that,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So it just depends. Now I started my community really, online because
Mhm.
I couldn't really find enough. I started a local community here,
Right.
but I live in a town with only 15,000 people, so there's not a lot of people.
Right.
And so I wanted to build a community, and so I did that online. So I think it just depends on the community.
Mhm.
Um, so I would say coming back to the person, to know whether or not you've got a supportive community is like, how do you feel around that
Right.
community? Just
Right.
notice, do you feel like a sense of a drop,
Mhm.
or even looking at social media? do you feel a sense of a drop afterwards? Just
Hmm.
really start to tune in. A lot of people don't know how to tune into their feelings. Like, I don't know, you and I probably weren't taught that years ago, right?
Sure, of course.
And that's part of what I teach a lot now, is because it's a feedback mechanism for
Mm,
us. And so just notice, do you feel uplifted, or
mm,
do you feel a drop? Do you feel expansive, or do you feel like
mm.
contracting? So just start to notice this and really tune in. So that's how you can tell if it's working for you or not.
Hmm.
Just tune in to how you're feeling.
Yeah. Fatigued or energized. It's
Yeah.
so yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean we're all these energetic beings, right? So it's like we just need to learn how to tap into that frequency and see which
Hmm.
direction it's going in. That's really
Yeah.
good insights. So you've got this amazing event going on right now called Becoming Pain Free. Um, I'm curious, as you were doing the interviews for that, was there anything that you learned when you were doing the interviews that surprised you? That you were like, wow, I can really use that, or I can really help other people with this information.
I really love talking with people and hearing their perspectives. And sometimes there's some new things, and sometimes it's things are said like in a little bit of a different way
Mm,
that really helps me. Like when the first time I heard Amy Apigian talking
mm,
about trauma not being the event, but being
great.
how your nervous system responds to it, that was like a little bit of a paradigm shift, right?
Mhm,
Um, for this one, I had so many great guests, but I talked to Dr. Jeffrey Bland, who's
mhm.
who's called the father of functional
Yes.
medicine. He was the first, kind of one of the first people that started talking about, hey, food might have something to do with your
Yeah.
health.
Yeah.
And anyway, he was talking about foods, and really how a lot of them just don't have. They've been the soil is so depleted, the foods
Right.
don't have the nutrients and so on.
Mhm,
So he was talking about some foods, and the studies that they're doing in this ancient food called tartary buckwheat,
mhm.
which isn't buckwheat at all. It's not a gluten food, but it's like loaded with wonderful things for our body, and then that
Mhm.
can help boost the immune system as well. So that was kind of interesting, because I
Yeah.
when I first started my journey, I was really focused on food a lot,
Mhm.
almost to the point where I got like fear of food. And
Yeah. Yeah. Been there.
so I kind of stepped back a little bit from talking about food too much now, because I
Mhm.
really think that we need to start here with our thoughts and our feelings.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to get that perspective and kind of go, okay, yes,
Mhm.
yes, of course, our foods do really impact us. And so but it's also surprising to talk to some of the other experts about things like toxins, environmental toxins, which we think of as from food and so on, or maybe chemicals that are around us, but also electromagnetic,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I've kind of known about this for a while now, but really it's impacting that it really impacts some people's lives in a huge way, that they can't like live near a cell phone tower,
Hmm.
but they can't have Wi-Fi in their house, and that once you become sensitive, it's very hard to go back to not being sensitive. So really being careful about noticing that what you're exposing yourself to. Like, people don't think about wearing earbuds, right? Those
Right.
ear
Right.
And that you're exposing your brain to electromagnetic frequencies,
Right.
but you are.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so our brains are pretty important.
Yeah. And yeah, I think you talked to Lloyd, right? Lloyd Burrell.
Yep, Lloyd Burrell. Yep.
It's interesting kind of to bring this back to frequency and energy and vibration. You know, we don't know how these EMFs are affecting, like you talk about going into a room and is that community lifting you up? Is it making you feel energized? Is it making you feel withdrawn? And we don't know what EMFs, I mean, we're starting to learn what these
Yeah.
EMFs are doing to our own frequency,
Yeah.
our own native frequency and how it's
Yeah.
affecting us. So that's a really
Well,
important point.
I
Yeah,
just
go ahead.
remembered another really interesting thing, because
Okay.
I don't know anything about psychedelics. I just have not ventured into that at all. So I did interview Maya Sheetreat about
Oh, right.
psychedelics, which was really
Awesome.
interesting.
Yeah.
Um, but she was talking about macrodosing, microdosing, but
Hmm.
also quantum dosing. And I don't know if you've heard about that,
No,
but
I
it's
haven't
like,
heard about that yet.
yeah, it's not even, you don't even take anything. So, we both know we're energetic beings. And so
Mhm.
being exposed to the frequency of
Oh,
them without
wow.
actually having to ingest or take anything
Huh.
is also another level of dosing. So that was really surprising to me.
Really
But
interesting.
then not surprising, right? When you think
Yeah,
about
of course. Absolutely. That's amazing. Well, and again, it's like when you talked about breath work before, there's a form of breath work where it can get um maybe intense isn't the right word, but very powerful, where you're actually creating DMT, which is basically a psychedelic
it.
molecule
Hmm.
in your own brain. Like we produce it anyway. We're all humans produce it. We're all, we're all carrying. But you can do this form of breath work that can create more of that in your brain, and it becomes this incredibly healing and potent um, experience.
Hmm.
So I'm definitely a proponent of plant medicine therapy and psychedelics for the right cause and the right person when it's done responsibly with a the skilled practitioner or facilitator. So I think
Yeah.
that's definitely very, very powerful. I'm
And
glad you
that is
talked. That's
important that
yeah,
Dr. Maya said,
yeah.
having someone there with you, because it's an experience
Hmm.
like people have never had before. So you do need to have the right supports there
Yes,
around you. So
absolutely.
lot to
Yeah,
consider. Anyway, it really super interesting
that's
conversation.
great. Yeah, no, it sounds like it's you've got such a well-rounded group of people for this event and talking about so many great things and all focused on healing and relieving pain and really getting to the root cause. I mean, like the real root cause of things. And that's so important. And I'm just grateful for you for doing the event. And I hope people do register to check it out. So I think by the time people see this, there'll still be time for them to watch
Yep.
all the interviews. So
Yep.
definitely.
Yep. And it's really I mean, I'm getting such great feedback already from people. And I'm doing a mastery session each day
Oh, wow.
with
Good.
with everyone. And so I'm leading you through these different experiential kind of
Mhm.
exercises where you can actually relieve pain in the moment. And
Mhm.
people are doing it. And what I really want to give people in this event is this belief, because we've got 20% of the population suffering from chronic pain
Right.
and 65% of people over the age of 65.
Mm.
And it's not just pain, even though that's what I deal with. Like, really, healing is possible.
Mhm.
And so I want people to to understand through this event that it is possible. It's possible for other people, it's possible for them too. And I just really want to give people hope and empower them. And that's why I do what I do, is why
Mhm.
you do what you do, right? We just want to help people, because every person that can heal themselves, we're just making the world a better place, one person at a time, and it has a ripple effect out on all the people in their lives.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Well, Jane, I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing and for this event and your time today. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks, Joe. It was great chatting with you.
Likewise.